As her fangs meet flesh, a metallic flavor fills her mouth. Witnesses stand in utter quiet around the stone circle, the shadows of their torches dancing against the old monoliths. The young lady doesn't think twice. Transformation requires this. Steam rises from well-placed incisions on the frigid altar where her mother's body lies still. Every organ bestows its own authority. The brain pounded in time with her swallowing, the liver for fortitude, the heart for bravery, and the drums for wisdom. This is the initial incarnation of Cinderella. 5. An active participant in the oldest magic known to man, rather than a damsel in rags waiting to be rescued. As she voluntarily eats what was served, the chanting intensifies. The greatest sacrifice for social advancement, her mother's last gift. There are no pumpkin carriages or fairy godmothers here, just the innate knowledge that, in order to grow into something bigger, you must first eat what came before you. The witnesses give a nod of agreement. The ceremony is almost finished. She will soon come out changed, with her mother's strength inside her own body. In primordial darkness, with societies that realized power transfer necessitated physical consumption, this is how the story started. Italian, French, German, and Celtic versions all attempted to conceal this initial terror. But beneath every recounting, the truth beats. How did ritual cannibalism start the most cherished princess tale in human history? How did we get from stone altars being used for sacred consumption to animated films with happy music sung by mice? We must first examine what their ancestors accomplished to become Cinderella in order to comprehend why young girls aspire to be her. We have to follow the blood-soaked trail from Germanic mutilation practices to Versailles political intrigue, from primordial transformation rituals to Renaissance murderous schemes. Your perspective on all transformation stories, including your own, will be permanently altered by the truth about Cinderella. The drums ceased. Steam rose from the exact cut across the girl's mother's chest as she lay motionless on the altar in the flickering light of the torches. Humanity's first Cinderella tale is depicted in this scene, which was recreated from Celtic oral traditions that have been passed down through the ages. Communities congregated in stone circles during particular lunar phases to observe the ultimate transformation right long before writing was invented. The main character wasn't a helpless victim needing to be saved. She actively participated in the holy cannibalism practiced in Essa, which was intended to pass down power from one generation to the next. Strict procedures were followed in the methodical consumption. The first to arrive was the still warm heart, which gave courage for the difficulties that were ahead. The brain followed, bringing with it memories and collected wisdom. The hands that were used last included weaving, healing, leadership, and skill transfer. Ceremonial blade markings on human bones are found concentrated around these particular body parts, according to archaeological data from Neolithic sites around Europe. The cuts exhibit accuracy, respect, and intent. The eating itself wasn't the worst part though. The community requirement was the worst. Each person in the circle had to bear the secret, observe, and provide their approval. 7-year-olds stood on the outside ring, learning that witnesses were necessary for transformation. Until all onlookers nodded in agreement, the drums would not start up again. Exile resulted from refusal, or worse. It wasn't murder when the girl chewed on her mother's flesh. Her mother had volunteered and spent months teaching her daughter the correct methods. This was the most primitive kind of love, sacrificing oneself in order to guarantee your child's advancement. It took years to prepare, in order to teach their daughters which organs gave them which powers. Mothers would mark certain symbols on their faces to overcome their innate disgust. They first practiced on animals. What we now know about these rites was completely altered by what archaeologists discovered next to the bones. Pictographic instructions were found on clay tablets that existed before written language. The pictures showed the actual metamorphosis as well as the eating, their spirits blending, the daughter's looks changing to mirror her mother's. They were more than just cannibals. They were practitioners of the first magic, and by eating them, they changed into different people. The moon phase had a significant impact. Full moons are used for power transfers, new moons for beauty makeovers, and the waning crescent is most deadly for absorbing the strengths of adversaries. Different preparations, witnesses, and costs were needed for each phase. The placement of the stone circles was deliberate. They created ideal conditions for transformation by lining up with the movements of the stars. However, why did communities tolerate even promote this since it was successful? It was true that the girls who devoured their mothers changed. They transformed when they came out of the circles, stronger, more capable, and more self-assured. The rite produced new entities from the blending of two, whether through psychological integration or something more profound. Refusing the ceremony came at a cost, worse than death. Those who were unable to finish the consumption and balked at the last minute were shunned by both their old and new selves. They became living warnings about the peril of incomplete metamorphosis as they roamed between groups and had no place. We have forgotten what these archaic societies comprehended. The process of transformation is violent. It necessitates demolishing what was and will be. This reality is obscured by glitter and magic wands in contemporary Cinderella tales. However, the original message is still there. The servant girl must die in order to become the princess. She was literally killed in those torchlit circles, consumed by her own daughter, who would go on to assume a new name. These prehistoric societies had no idea that their rite of cannibalistic metamorphosis would develop into something much more sinister, a model for social murder that would spread across Renaissance Italy, where Cinderella would learn how to murder in a fashionable manner. The lid of the massive wood trunk hung in perfect proportion. Zazora had taken 17 measurements of the angle. Zaza, the Cinderella who killed her way to fame, was introduced to us by Italian author Giambattista Boscel in 1634, according to his account. Legata Sceneronola, deliberate assassination, takes the place of primitive spirituality. Her mother is not consumed by this Cinderella. With Renaissance accuracy, she plans her stepmother's demise. The murderous plot develops with mechanical genius. Claiming to be looking for wedding linens, Zaza persuades her stepmother to look into a big wooden trunk. Weighted by hidden stones, the lid is ready to snap shut. Zaza is well aware of when to unintentionally bump into the supporting stick and where to stand. The older woman's neck is crushed by the lid, and the sound of vertebral cracks reverberates throughout the chamber. But there was more sinister than simple murder in Zaza's writings. Her private writings are filled with pages of computations, including force equations, angles of impact, melons, and approximate human skulls. She prepared for months by researching her stepmother's daily schedule and figuring out the ideal time when maids would be out and shouts might not be heard. Layers of premeditation are added by the self-harm element. Zazora slams her own hand in a drawer, causing obvious bruising, before activating the trunk. She rehearses her astonished cries and her heartbroken breakdown. Upon the arrival of servants, they discover a frantic girl who has bruises consistent with her attempt to save her stepmother. The alternative that sweet Zaza orchestrated everything turns out to be too unsettling to consider, so the community accepts the accident story. Elimination as a means of social elevation became the open secret of Renaissance Italy. Noble families knew that in order for someone to climb to a position that was limited, someone had to die. Zaza's tale wasn't made up. It was a booklet of instructions. Basil wrote for readers who understood every ploy, every excuse, and every well-timed tear. Nobody realized the reason for her self-inflicted wound at the time. Yes, the bruising on her hand resembled defensive wounds, but to those who could interpret the pattern, it told a different tale. The marks created a particular pattern, indicating to possible allies that she was for hire. Other aristocratic families, seeing a great benefit in a lady who could remove barriers so effectively, started contacting her father with marriage proposals. 6 more killings are included in the Italian version. Zaza has more than one stepmother. Every replacement experiences enigmatic mishaps, falls from balconies, food poisoning at specific times, and heartbreaking run-ins with escaped horses. Willful blindness is maintained by the community. Pretending it's a coincidence is preferable to admitting they're housing a serial killer who preys on mothers. The emotional aloofness of Zola is what makes Bosel's rendition so terrifying. Unlike her ancient forebears, she does not eat her victims, she just takes them off. No spiritual metamorphosis or ceremonial significance, just the pragmatic eradication of competition. Like a merchant keeping track of inventory, she keeps a journal documenting every death. She only displays emotion when she does grief in public. In this version, the prince is certain of his choice. Finding the mystery woman, PROM, is not the purpose of the slipper test. Verifying which murderer he wishes to wed is the goal. Royal families required someone who could kill competitors covertly and engage in court intrigue. Zaza's notoriety comes before her. The prince is not looking for innocence. He wants to be competent at murder. But there was one last bombshell. In Zaza's diaries, after marrying the prince, she writes her final journal entry outlining preparations to get rid of him. She becomes ready to surpass even royalty after realizing that evolution necessitates destroying or consuming what came before. Another stepping stone was the princess phase. The notebook ends in the middle of a phrase. It's unknown from history if she was successful, or if she eventually encountered someone who was better at elimination than she was. Bosel was aware of what ancient societies know. Violence is required for rash change. He merely brought it up. To date, with Renaissance views, here there are no holy rites only, the weaponization of pure ambition. His crowd adored it. Perhaps some even made notes of their own, seeing themselves in Zaza's methodical progress. French courtiers at Versailles evolved something subtler and far more terrible as Italian princesses polished murder as a social technique. They would turn Cinderella from a murderer into a warrior of the mind. Perrault saw it happen every week, at Versailles, where a poorly timed curtsy might spell death. Writing from within Europe's most perilous court, Charles Perrault wrote his Cinderella in 1697, in his version. French psychological warfare took the place of Italian murder, and Cinderella became a skilled manipulator who had to navigate lethal social currents. There was no romance in the glass slipper, who could uphold impossibly high standards without breaking was put to the test. The rules that governed Versailles were spoken yet written in blood. To laugh at the wrong time was to be banished. Social death resulted from wearing hues that unintentionally matched the king's mistress. Perrault saw courtiers use only well-timed yawns and calculated fan movements to annihilate one another. Compared to any Italian murderer, his Cinderella had to be more intelligent, cunning, and psychologically astute. A fate worse than fiction befell the Duchess, who served as the model for Cinderella's stepmother. She made one mistake. According to historical sources, when the Queen scowled during a musical performance, she grinned. Within 6 months, her reputation was ruined by carefully planned rumors. Her husband found fake evidence of extramarital encounters. Convents received her children. She also passed away in poverty, most likely from poisoning but officially from a fever. All for an untimely grin. Perrault, through strategic inactivity that conceals hypervigilance, Cinderella manages to survive. She takes insults as a strategy rather than a sign of weakness, realizing that unseen allies are gained through visible pain. For witness impact, each tier is computed. A network of information gatherers is created with each act of compassion toward servants. Knowing that being unreadable meant being deadly at Versailles, she practices enigmatic smiles in mirrors. The shadow network of former courtiers who survived by guiding others through palace intrigue is what the fairy godmother symbolizes, not magic. These retired women ran extensive intelligence operations, teaching young women the codes that mean the difference between life and death and exchanging information for favors. There is nothing otherworldly about the transformation sequence. It's performance preparation. Gaining the ability to walk in shoes that are impossible without displaying pain. To dance while considering each partner's political ramifications. 3/4 were spared death after Perrault encoded a warning. He warned of an impending poisoning at a ball in his original manuscript using precise language that matched current court rumors. 3 young women were unable to attend due to unexpected illness. Exasperated, the poisoner made mistakes that exposed him. For the person who could figure it out, Perrault's fairy tale was also an intelligence report. Modern readers would be horrified to learn the true purpose of the glass slippers. To demonstrate that they had slaves for all chores and didn't need to labor, women at Versailles wore impossible styles. Wearing glass shoes made it unable to run, defend yourself, and needed continual help. Successfully wearing them demonstrated that you were a person of sufficient loyalty to warrant protection. The woman who can walk in complete control while displaying obvious fragility is what the prince is looking for, not the foot that fits. Real-life court rivals who Perrault witnessed destroying one another are represented by his stepsisters. Their social foot mutilation isn't physical. They bend themselves into unachievable poses, give up authenticity in order to gain acceptability. Internal bleeding as a result of ongoing performance pressure. They have already distorted themselves beyond recognition in an attempt to conform to court standards, which is why they flunked the slipper test. Versailles' harsh reality was imprinted. By the midnight deadline, transformation was never permanent. As long as the performance remained flawless, the court's favor was preserved. Exile ensued after one misstep, and a brief moment of mask slipping. The midnight when protection ended and true selves appeared was a constant source of terror for courtiers. Cinderella's escape was due to her ability to spot the exact time when the political tide turned, not to a magical conclusion. Strategic kindness turned into a shield and a weapon. Cinderella showed strength by forgiving her stepsisters. Only the powerful could afford pity. Use However, there was a darker detail in Perrault's original. In private, she made sure they continued to rely on her charity, eliminating them as threats, while in public, she forgave them. Versailles taught that it was safer to keep adversaries close and appreciative than to annihilate them. Court danger was personified by the prince himself. His quest for the unidentified woman was political rather than romantic. He had to find out who had such adroit command of court navigation, a lady who could show up, take control, and then disappear without leaving any traces was either the greatest ally or the greatest danger, which was ascertained using the slipper test. Germanic forests reverberated with screams as the brothers grimly gathered accounts of divine justice that would change Cinderella once more, while French nobility danced in glass shoes. The oldest sister flew through her own toe while the kitchen knife scratched against bone. In 1812, the brothers Grimm gathered their version and found a Cinderella devoid of Italian calculating and French refinement. Blood, justice, and self-mutilation were mentioned by their sources, rural German women who had acquired oral traditions, as the cost of social development. This Cinderella came from a society where change necessitated overt sacrifice. Communities that supported instantaneous, brutal justice existed in the German woodland. Germanic culture encouraged public spectacle, in contrast to Italy's planned mishaps or Versailles discreet poisonings. The Grimm brothers spoke with witnesses who vowed to have witnessed trees sprouting from graves, ravens removing eyes, and blood revealing secrets that people attempted to conceal. This universe of literal divine intervention was the setting for their Cinderella. The raven's uncanny vision revealed more than just the presence of blood in the shoe. According to Germanic mythology, these birds were able to detect soul damage and identify areas where ambition had corroded their inner selves. The stepsisters' mutilation was only a physical expression of their already completed spiritual self-destruction. Those who sacrificed humanity for progress were surrounded by ravens who marked them for public notice. There is more to the scenario than just despair. Blood sacrifice provided access to authority in Germanic culture. This was clear to the sisters. They were aiming to pay the customary price for transformation rather than only trying to fit a shoe. Offering tainted payment was their mistake, not the attempt. Blood supplied dishonestly had no power and simply resulted in punishment. The Germanic concept of authority was demonstrated by the prince's response to the blood-soaked slipper. A real leader was able to spot deceit right away. Royal blood talked to blood. The prince's initial blindness implied either deliberate ignorance or a weak lineage. Provide a ruler that is both hazardous. He demonstrated that he needs supernatural intervention to carry out fundamental leadership duties only after ravens practically screamed the truth. Violence was celebrated in the community for a specific reason. At Cinderella's wedding, guests celebrated as ravens pecked out the stepsister's eyes not out of cruelty, but out of relief. Germanic communities were constantly afraid of members who had made deals with evil entities or of hidden corruption. Everyone was reassured by public punishment that justice was still upheld, that treachery had repercussions, and that dangers could be recognized and eliminated by the community. The acclaim from the wedding guests was rational to the Germanic worldview, but unsettling to modern sensibilities. They rejoiced in using violence to restore the natural order. The stepsisters had tried to circumvent basic laws. Eros is attempting to defraud royalty by claiming benefits intended for someone else who offered a bogus sacrifice. They never tried such trickery again because of their blindingly restored balance. The revelation of truth via blood transcended the metaphor of fairy tales. Blood was a major component of trial by ordeal practices used by Germanic societies. Blood had significance in its color, flow, and response to holy objects. The blood-filled slipper was an active revelation rather than a regrettable side effect. Worthiness was assessed by the shoe itself. Used blood evidence to refute misleading claims. The bleak version has frequently sanitized details. Without stepping in, Cinderella observes the blindings and mutilations. As violence breaks out all around her, she remains completely impartial and neither protests nor cheers. This casts her, not as a victim or a winner, but as an agent of fate. Harama, while cosmic justice functions by her existence, she only exists. Such people were acknowledged by Germanic tradition as being influenced by fate and perilous to oppose or aid. Justice is something that the forest itself takes part in. From the mother's tomb, trees sprout, birds are messengers. Even the ashes from Cinderella's hearth, which are the source of her name, have the capacity to change. Nature actively participates in human development by determining deservingness, permitting advancement, and punishing wrongdoing. Cinderella is not found by the prince. She is delivered by the woodland, identified as chosen. The stepsisters were aware of the cost and made the voluntary payment. But underneath the blood and mutilation was a deeper dread. They realized that in their society, social advancement necessitated material compensation, and that change needed the sacrifice of flesh. Their sole error was attempting to pay with dishonesty instead of a sincere donation. Had they publicly offered sacrifices, truly offered their body for change, according to Germanic tradition, they may have been successful. Another element to Cinderella's dark development was the bargains Irish maidens made with monsters who would haunt their bloodlines for centuries, while German sisters bled for prestige. Every time she blinked, terms changed as the ink flowed across the page like living animals. Supernatural contracts were incorporated in Celtic Cinderella variations, gathered from oral traditions in Scotland and Ireland, turning the tale into a horror tale for future generations. Here, metamorphosis was accomplished through legally binding deals with the Cida, the fairy folk who functioned like supernatural loan sharks with eternity to collect, rather than through cannibalism, murder, or mutilation. What humans couldn't deliver, the Cida did. Instant change, flawless beauty, and captivating charm. However, their contracts included provisions written in languages that existed before human speech and used terminology that had multidimensional meanings. A maiden may signify beauty that lasts till the kiss of real love, only to learn that the seed characterized pure love as something humans could never attain. Certain contract tricks were cautioned against by Irish storytellers. Your child was not your firstborn. It referred to the initial creation you made after signing, which could be an idea, a breath, or an exuberant moment. The service ran on otherworld time for a year and a day, with minutes extending into decade. To be beautiful without sorrow was to be unable to grieve, even while one's loved ones were dying. When the original signer's granddaughter turned 16 50 years later, the contract's concealed clause came into effect. She found out abruptly that she was unable to touch iron cross, flowing water, or attend places of worship. Interest was accruing on the loan that had been passed down, until entire bloodlines lived under the bounds of supernatural laws they had never signed. Each generation discovered fresh limitations and obligations. Celtic Cinderella's metamorphosis was achieved by mortgaging her descendants' freedom rather than by making a personal sacrifice. Her feet were tied to fairy paths by the glass slippers, which were crystal shoes made by otherworld forgers that allowed her to dance on air. Although her moonbeam-woven clothing looked stunning, it identified her as seed property to those who could see. Because otherworld covenants required it, the prince himself might be enamored with her. Only after 3 generations, when patterns were evident, did the seed's full purpose come to light. They had no desire for individual souls. Bloodlines were what they desired. Every contract produced children that could travel between worlds and hybrid families who were half human and half other. These offspring acted as conduits, permitting the power of Cida to permeate the human world. Species alteration was what appeared to be individual metamorphosis. Protection clauses acquired via painful experience were incorporated into Scottish variations. Girls were instructed by wise women to sign using simply their childhood names, which had no legal significance. Once they became women, they knew Cida couldn't stay glamorous around heavy metals, so they donned iron jewelry to court balls. Since taking fairy food formed enduring relationships, they kept bread in their wallets, but there was a cost to protection. Those who were able to successfully negotiate fairy contracts without being trapped were labeled as cunning and so dangerous. Centuries have passed since the seed hair was last remembered, waiting for a bloodline to produce someone weak and desperate enough to sign without thoroughly reading, before a girl was forced to sign her bloodline back into bondage due to a nasty stepmother and a terrible harvest. Cinderella's ancestors might have lived in freedom for eons. When she attempted to elope, her great-granddaughter learned why she was unable to cross flowing river. Her feet just halted at the bridge, their muscles trapped by contract words she had never seen before. As the fairy debt accumulated, her lover watched her grow older by decades and minutes. She changed but lived. As recompense for an ancestor's ambition, a piece of her was permanently left at that bridge. In Celtic tales, the transformation itself occurred instantaneously but not fully. Cinderella became lovely, endearing, and elegant, but a crucial detail was removed. According to witnesses, she was flawless yet hollow, more like a well-executed portrait of a person than a real person. a beautiful shell that performed personhood without really feeling it was left behind after the seed hair collected there. Payment from her humanity essence. Celtic cautions highlight the fact that fairy contracts were never really terminated. They were unbreakable, even by death. They were linked to reincarnations, followed souls into the afterlife, and awaited activation in bloodlines. A family could be haunted for generations by a pact struck in desperation for one bull's metamorphosis. The glass slipper served as a badge of ownership rather than identification. She was claimed by the fairy brand throughout many lifetimes. Scandinavian maidens paid a different price than Celtic bloodlines, which were burdened with fairy debt. And Seth, their very humanity trapped in ice palaces that gave birth to a monster of a different type. As the winter goddess touched her cheek, her breath turned to ice. Like water from a broken cup, human warmth is evaporating. Cultures that knew change through freezing gave rise to Scandinavian Cinderella variations. In places where spring brought brutal renewal and winter murdered effectively, there Cinderella gained beauty via thermal death and resurrection rather of magic. Here, girls who exchanged human warmth for heavenly perfection gave rise to the Snow Queen concept that would later serve as the inspiration for Hans Christian Andersen. The ceremony took place during the winter solstice, when there was hardly any daylight and the line separating life and death became increasingly blurred. In an attempt to reach ice palaces that only materialized under certain circumstances, desperate maidens scaled mountains. Nights without a moon when the sky was decorated by the aurora borealis. The winter goddess provided change there, flawless beauty that never faded, authority over storms and frost, transcendence of mortal concerns. Just warmth appeared to be the price. However, warmth was not only about temperature. After her change, the first person she touched screamed not out of cold, but out of existential fear. The Ice Maiden's fingertips conveyed emptiness and emotional zero to everyone she came into contact with, draining them of joy, love, and hope where human touch fostered connection. She became strong but alone, gorgeous yet untouchable, and superior, but essentially alone. Systematic freezing was a part of the transition process itself. The first extremities, the nose tip, fingers, and toes were numbed. Then the cold seeped in, causing blood to crystallize and organs to turn into ice that nonetheless managed to continue functioning. Throughout, the maiden was awake, sensing her humanity ebb and flow before the approaching frost. At that crucial point, she had to decide between dying or entirely freezing. Panicked people who made an effort to stay warm broke like glass. Mirror ice revealed to her her true self. Literally, not figuratively. Ice maidens only reflect on frozen surfaces. They do not reflect in water. She saw her own shape in ice mirrors, a hollow masterpiece of frozen beauty that was empty within save for the swirling snow. The flawless exterior was little more than a frozen shell. She had exchanged her inner self for a change on the outside. The infectious character of this metamorphosis was highlighted in Norse tales. Unconsciously, ice maidens froze their environment. At their approach, flowers died. When they touched glasses of water, the water solidified. In their presence, even fire found it difficult to burn. The homes of the families that took them in eventually became uninhabitable. No matter how many logs they burned, the warmth would still leak out. The cost of being able to survive winter court was not explicitly indicated in the narrative. They experienced everything from a numbing distance, even if ice maidens could swim in frozen oceans, dance nude in blizzards, and construct palaces out of snow. Joy was like looking through thick ice at bliss. Love shifted from being a visceral experience to an academic idea. By losing the capacity for true emotion, they acquired tolerance to bodily pain. In Norse adaptations, the prince was frequently another changed entity, an individual who had struck a similar agreement with winter troops. Dynastic horror resulted from their coupling. Children of ice parents were born incorrectly. They were gorgeous but predatory, requiring human warmth to thrive while murdering everybody they came into contact with. Thermal vampirism was perpetuated by these ice children, who turned into their own winter ghosts. To identify ice maidens, communities created exams. Burning coals had to be held by suspected women. The people were in pain. Ice maidens had no emotions. Mirrors were what they had to breathe on. Human breath froze. The breath of ice froze. Most illuminating, they needed to actually chuckle. Ice maidens could laugh flawlessly, but they lacked genuine warmth and happiness. Though technically accurate, the sound lacked spiritual depth. The potential of reversal existed, but it turned out to be worse than preserving change. An ice maiden would melt not figuratively, but literally into slush that held onto consciousness until it completely vanished if she managed to create true warmth, which is darkened, usually by seeing loved ones go through tremendous sorrow. Stories from the north warned of streams that wept, puddles that murmured, and morning dew that expressed regrets. Scandinavian Cinderella became a monument to beauty rather than a real woman, trading all inside for perfection on the outside. She was able to dance on water, walk through fire, and stand on air because to the glass slipper equivalent, which were shoes made of ice that never melted. However, every step she took froze in the ground below, creating a permanent winter path. Her metamorphosis failed entirely because it went wonderfully. She became what she was looking for and found it to be as hollow as ice cut by the wind. Eastern European beauties had to deal with something worse than the chilly solitude that northern ice queens experienced. Bloodlines would always be haunted by Baba Yaga's test, which blurred the line between human and monster. It was painful to look at the patterns the chicken legs carved into the earth, the manifestation of non-Euclidean geometry in a witch's home. Variants of Slavic Cinderella transformed into worlds that defied fundamental reality. These tales, which were gathered from oral traditions in Russia, Poland, and the Czech Republic, told of Baba Yaga, the witch whose test perverted the basic essence of life. In addition to changing bodies, standing on chicken legs, her cottage functioned as a transformation chamber where the law of physics was subordinated to emotion. In Baba Yaga's hut, geography was governed by feelings rather than facts. Fearful corridors swelled, while confident corridors contracted. There were only rooms when certain emotions triggered them. For the guilty, a chamber of shame came into being. Deepest wishes were reflected in a hall of mirrors. Girls who came in search of change had to navigate architecture that reacted to their mental states. She recognized the names uttered by the skulls on the fence posts. Former applicants who had failed exams were made to watch new ladies try what killed them, their consciousness stuck in bone. Depending on their living nature, each skull retained its personality, memories, and desperate need to warn or deceive. A clamor of conflicting advice drove seekers insane, with some offering sincere counsel and others purposefully undermining it. Baba Yaga's exams focused on preserving identity, while reality changed rather than task completion as the rooms changed dimensions. She would insist that the girl look for poppy seeds in the ash, clearing a forest, then a tunnel beneath the sea, and finally clouds over mountains. The difficulty lay in sorting while life itself grew unpredictable. When the environment refused to provide stability, many girls just melted because they were unable to sustain a coherent self. In Slavic tradition, the process of metamorphosis entailed consuming reality itself, not only flesh. Selected candidates were required to consume meals that were available in several states at the same time. Meat that was also a living animal, bread that was also stone, and water that was also fire. Every meal changed their basic essence, introducing layers of life that shouldn't be together. They evolved into quantum entities that existed in several states prior to being noticed. What had entered wasn't what came out with her face on. Baba Yaga's grads were characterized by witnesses as being accurately incorrect. Although technically correct, they are profoundly foreign. They breathed irregularly, blinked too slowly, and created upward falling shadows. Until stressful situations exposed their diversity, they appeared to be human. Each hand existed in multiple locations at once, and each viewer saw a distinct expression on their face. The Slavic prince was chasing anomalies rather than looking for a bride. Royal lineages were living detecting systems for Baba Yaga's transformed people because they were sensitive to reality in fractions. Only a person who had undergone a similar transformation could wear an object that was simultaneously made of glass, iron, and living flesh, making the slipper test a multi-dimensional puzzle. Polish variations highlighted how Baba Yaga's men were spreading. Her test-takers didn't simply transform themselves, they distorted the world around them. Their house furnishings took on impossibly complex shapes. Their offspring possessed the ability to step sideways out of existence from birth. Stories of geography rearranging itself were told by entire towns. The distortions are always centered on Baba Yaga's graduates. Even failing Baba Yaga's tests brought about metamorphosis. Czech tales cautioned. Those who left her hut in the middle of their tribulations discovered that they were missing mentally rather than physically. They may become incapable of understanding the notion of the past, lose the ability to recognize the color blue, or forget what warmth meant. People were left functionally shattered in reality as a result of these partial transformations, which frequently proved worse than death. Identity. Sacrifice was always a part of the witch's reward, albeit it varied. In a world where deception is necessary, she might require that you be able to lie, making you dangerously honest. Any observer might perceive you as supernatural if she were to take your shadow. She usually takes over your dreams, which prevents you from getting a good night's sleep and leaves you in a constant state of transition between waking and sleeping. Never completely either. The Aishare Baba Yaga's cottage was the pinnacle of metamorphosis. It was a building that existed only by pure will and defied physical law by insisting on its own reality. Those who made it through her tests had a similar capacity to force their own reality on the cosmos until it bowed to their will. Because of this power, they were both human and different, able to change the world with pure willpower, yet no longer fully a part of it. Every culture contributed its own horror, but they were all united by the awful reality of metamorphosis. It was necessary to first become nothing in order to become anything else. Every Cinderella sees her own death at the turning point. When the princess comes out of her body, 7 girls are grabbing frantically. In every variation, Celtic contracts, Norse freezing, Germanic blood sacrifice, French psychological warfare, Italian murder, Slavic reality bending, and brutal primeval cannibalism, one constant, H, appears. The original self must die in order to undergo transformation, a literal cessation of who you were, with something else replacing you and wearing your memories like borrowed clothing, rather than a metaphorical death. Unsettling similarities are revealed by neuroscience. Brain scans of individuals going through significant life changes, such as changing careers, changing religions, or receiving extensive therapy, reveal patterns that are exactly like those seen in near-death experiences. The same areas come into play. The same brain circuits break down and reorganize. Asterisk. The brain releases the same hormones and sets off the same reactions when metamorphosis is treated as if it were a dying event. Neurology confirms that the moment of transformation registers as literal death in every rendition because it is death, which is what fairy tales transmit metaphorically. When a servant girl undergoes transformation, she does not come out of it altered. She accesses her memories, performs her identity, and stops something new from forming from her materials. But the initial consciousness expires. The ghost in every Cinderella tale is unaware that she has passed away. Memory, not the ego, but its recordings, becomes the sole means of survival, played back by a new entity that believes it to be an extension of the previous one that changed. Cinderella recalls her time as a servant girl, her pain, and her hopes, but she also recalls watching home videos. Intellectual knowledge becomes devoid of felt experience when the emotional bond was broken. Her memories, but not her spirit, are in what replaces her. If the term soul refers to the ongoing thread of consciousness from conception to the present, then that thread breaks at the time of transition. What remains is a fresh thread that is essentially different but connected to old memories. Resurrection, not evolution, is what the princess donning Cinderella's face represents. She is a new being created from the dead of the old. This explains why every version has the uncanny valley effect. The primal intuition that anything bearing human shape isn't quite human is triggered when witnesses describe changed Cinderellas as being almost right. It makes sense why the prince is searching so much. In addition to a lady, he is looking for the only other person who has experienced a comparable death-birth and who can relate to his own pain of metamorphosis. Warnings concerning this demise were encoded in traditional civilizations. Transformations needed witnesses because of this. When internal continuity ended, someone had to keep in mind that the original individual maintained outward continuity. Communities that engaged in transformation rites established complex customs for preserving memories, songs that maintained identities prior to change, ceremonies in remembrance of the walking dead. This demise is aptly symbolized by the glass slipper, a shoe that fits only the dead foot in a certain shape, transparent as a ghost and stiff as a corpse. It's looking for a specific corpse form, the precise shape of death captured in crystal rather than living flesh. The only person who can wear death's keepsake is the one who died, right? Cross-cultural brain scans of contemporary transformation stories reveal the same pattern. Human minds interpret transformation stories as death and resurrection, whether they are depicted in makeover shows, superhero origin stories, or religious conversions. We are built to realize that in order to become something new, we must stop being something old. In disguise as aspiration, every transformation fantasy is a dying wish. The requirement of this universal truth is what makes it so unsettling. Death of previous stages is necessary for growth. Only because the child stopped does the adult exist. As the resurrection of yesterday's dead, you awaken each morning. Though essentially different, they are similar enough to assert continuity. Cinderella tales merely bring to light the invisible things that occur on a regular basis, the series of fatalities that make up a life. This realization can occasionally be disastrously brought on by modern therapy. Psychiatrists refer to the phenomenon that patients undergo after intense transformation treatment as dissolution panic, suddenly realizing that to change is to die. They're not incorrect. It is impossible for someone who goes into therapy with the intention of literally changing to come out of it changed. When someone achieves success, they die. This age-old cycle of death and rebirth persisted. Without realizing the horror that comes with our perpetual dying and becoming, it developed into a daily habit. The stepsister's knife and the cosmetic surgeon's scalpel follow the same route. Self-mutilation was repackaged as self-improvement in the tapestries. Modern concern with metamorphosis meticulously recreates the horrors of old Cinderella. As certainly as any fairy tale, Instagram before and after pictures capture the passing of past selves. Every transformation post honors a murder. The person in the before photo has been removed, and their social media pages now feature an after version of them that is essentially different but still bears their identity. LinkedIn profiles adhere precisely to Perot's versatile formula at carefully selecting professional personas that have little connection to the complexity of real people, and at presenting edited selves strategically. The glass slipper turns into an unachievable job criterion that requires applicants to alter their true selves in order to conform to corporate standards. Evaluations of culture fit look for those who have effectively eliminated undesirable parts of their identities. The methodical eliminations of Italian Cinderella are replicated by corporate rising. Whisper campaigns were used to damage colleagues. Failures were manipulated by superiors. Strategic information leaks remove competitors. The Zezelers who progress by carefully destroying barriers are acknowledged and rewarded by contemporary organizations. Performance appraisals measure the extent to which the original self has been suppressed and document the transition from human to corporate entity. Our forefathers referred to what we term glops as blood magic, and the blood price is still in place. In order to construct the body that will be, extreme fitness transformations eliminate the body that was. The former self is physically removed after cosmetic surgery. Every surgery erases traces of who you were and replaces it with artificial enhancements that declare your readiness to endure hardships in order to be accepted. Stone circle witnesses in the modern day are social media. The audience must accept the death of the past self in order for transformation to occur. Similar to how archaic societies nodded in agreement with cannibalistic devouring. Followers share and cherish records of identity death. Successful transformations with visibility are rewarded by the algorithm. Penalizes people who maintain an excessive amount of authenticity. Like fairy tales, the before and after pictures conceal the same secret. The person in the after has not improved from the person in the before. Although their duplicate bears the original's name and has access to their memories, they are essentially different. Friends said they experience an uncanny valley reaction when they see someone who has undergone significant change. They're still there, but it's not them. Unconsciously realizing death has happened, so the saying goes. Transformation as a public spectacle was perfected by reality television. Every cultural variation, bodily mutilation, psychological manipulation, and social elevation through the removal of the true self are all recreated in makeover programs. As participants give up their identities in hopes of advancement, audiences applaud. Years later, when the altered realize what they've lost, the programs never return. Dating apps, Giphy the glass slipper test, when the substitute is haunted by the death of the original self. Profiles set unrealistic expectations. Demand that others bend to meet certain requirements. When two creatures undergo mutual transformation, matches take place. Revisions looking for other revisions. Ghosts swiping directly at other dead people. Curated portrayal destroys the true self, which is concealed behind filters and deliberate viewpoints. Blood price is firmly encoded in contemporary beauty standards. Beauty came at the expense of suffering, from foot-destroying stilettos to potentially fatal operations. It replicates the self-mutilation of a stepsister. We have only cleaned the agony into acceptable narratives of empowerment and self-care. Medicalized the knife, and professionalized the bloodletting. Ongoing death cult is revealed even in language. To reinvent oneself is to destroy oneself. Become the finest version of yourself. the implied self is deserving of termination. To literally transform your life is to end it and begin a new one. We talk about identity informally. Death because what formerly required ceremony has become ordinary, and we have normalized the horror. The potential to sustain numerous simultaneous deaths is one of the new horrors brought about by digital change. Different versions are required for each platform. Every account has different performance requirements. Humans today are a collection of corpses. Every social media profile depicts a distinct death, metamorphosis, or ghost posing as a living person. However, no one version of Cinderella contains the most sinister reality. It's in what they all frantically attempt to conceal about the essence of power. Horrors were added by every culture that interpreted Cinderella's tale. However, they all had an unimaginable awareness of power. Consuming others is necessary for power. Every variation, from ancient cannibalism to contemporary social media, is based on this principle. Fuel is always needed for the metamorphosis, and that fuel is always the vital power of another person. Elevation necessitates consumption, whether it is through the literal devouring of mother's flesh, the murder of stepmothers, the destruction of rivals' reputations, or the mere occupation of space that others could occupy. This is aptly demonstrated by the glass slipper. Power makes the blood it stands in apparent, which is why it is translucent. Power cannot bend without breaking, which makes it unyielding. Power forbids sharing, thus it only accommodates one foot. The prince is looking for a fellow Redditus, someone who has eaten enough people to satisfy his own hunger rather than love. Witnesses are necessary for transformation because power necessitates recognition of its cruelty. The wretch was understood by the stone circle cultures. Everyone must witness the consumption, nod in agreement, and be complicit. Every shared transformation post on contemporary social media replicates this. We observe, we give our approval, and we accept identity death. The algorithm makes sure that as many witnesses as possible participate. Every story is infused with beauty, which is violence manifested. The reason the changed Cinderella is lovely is because she endured, embodied, and survived violence. Her beauty signals danger and demonstrates her ability to be harsh when necessary. The prince sees deadly instinct honed into a beautiful form rather than innocence, a threat show of beauty, a warning of what she will do to keep her job. The terror is brought to a close by the lover's possession ritual. Cinderella is not adored by the prince. Before she can claim him, he takes her since he knows she is a successful predator. A contract of mutual destruction is sealed by the marriage. Together they will now devour others, bring up kids who will carry on the tradition. The purpose of royal bloodlines is to focus and sustain transformation violence. Mass delusion completes the system with happy endings. We tell kids that these tales have happy endings. Joy comes from that change. Happiness is a product of power. We see them absorb the deception and start organizing their own changes and purchases. The delusion defends itself by portraying those who are aware of it as insane, resentful, unsuccessful, or incapable of completing their transformations. Making violence invisible, rather than eliminating it, was Disney's most significant transformation. The consuming keeps going on. Cinderella continues to ruin her past self, destroy her rivals, and change as a result of other people's pain. Animation merely conceals the blood and makes what ought to be horrifying pleasant. Youngsters learn to covet power without realizing whence it comes from and to demand change without realizing the price. Through Cinderella, contemporary parents unwittingly impart the lesson that, when done well, misery can be turned into power. For the successful self to survive, the real self must perish. That any cruelty is justified by beauty and elevation. The inherent cost of progress is the consumption of other people's time, attention, emotional effort, and physical labor. Under the pretext of princess tales, we teach children about cannibalism. The ultimate truth is revealed by the one thing that all versions have in common: change is invariably painful. Being someone else is not something that can be done gently. No bloodless beauty, no moral route to power. The moral of the narrative is that in order to succeed in human society, one must be willing to eat and be consumed. This is why the story endures. Those who reject this reality never change and will always be servants. The goal of contemporary therapeutic culture is to promote elevation without consumption, growth without death, and transformation without trauma. The harm caused by this sanitized version is worse. Without knowing the nature of transformation, people try it, startled when they sense their own death. When success tastes like blood, I'm horrified. Our forefathers were at least forthright about horror. They were aware of the true lessons found in princess tales. This leads us back to the stone circle where people first discovered the cost of change, where the truth about the nature of power was ingrained in the bones and blood. The drums start up again. Her mother's heart is swallowed by the girl. We now realize what we're seeing. Every culture that followed Italian, French, German, Celtic, Norse, Slavic, and Scythian added layers of disguise to this original truth, hiding consumption behind murders, contracts, and freezing trials. However, prehistoric communities understood that transformation required consuming life force, and the most potent consumption was willing sacrifice from a loved one. The witnesses give a nod of agreement. They have an understanding that contemporary audiences do not, that there is no crime committed by this girl. She fulfills the sacred pact, takes the power that is offered, and changes as a result of the ultimate manifestation of love. Her mother ensures her ascension through flesh by physically feeding her power. Here, no fairy godmothers brandish wands. No prince shows up to save the day. By embracing the agony of the price of salvation, the girl saves herself. This fact is contained in the stone circle, which preserves it in geological memory. Since then, every Cinderella tale has attempted to both conceal and codify this first honesty. For millennia, we have constructed complex metaphors to conceal the necessity of transformation, constructing mythical alternatives to cannibalism, romanticized stories to conceal consumption, and beauty standards to conceal blood costs. However, observe how contemporary culture is changing and note how the pattern endures. Parents make sacrifices for their children's progress not with their bodies, but with their effort, time, and life force over many years. Through social media, attention, validation, and emotional energy sucked up in endless scrolls, young people consume others. Corporate climbers feast on the careers of their colleagues. Despite being cleansed, the consumption is structurally the same. With her metamorphosis complete, the girl emerges from the altar. She now embodies her mother's fortitude, represents her strength, and carries her wisdom. Because they saw the cost, the community accepts her elevation. Glass slippers are not allowed here. Her feet are still bare, honest, and scarred by blood. To ratify the transformation brought about by sacred eating, she doesn't need a prince. She is honest, awful, and whole. This is the true beginning of Cinderella. Consuming provided life led to a human-to hybrid transformation rather than rags to wealth. This truth is diluted in every edition to make it more digestible, marketable, and kid-safe. However, beneath Broadway tunes and Disney animation, the original heartbeat is finer. Consuming makes us who we are. When others fall, we soar. Death is how we change. Without realizing it, modern parents who read Cinderella to their kids are carrying on an old custom. They sow the seeds of required horror and instill in young minds the pattern of transformation. Kids take in the instruction. It takes sacrifice to become unique. Progress necessitates consumption. Violence is justified by beauty. The truth endures, so does the story. Power is the result of taking power. See the cannibalism in any transformation story by viewing it through this lens. All makeovers display the consumption of documents. Bodies are hidden in every success story. Someone else's depression is necessary for every rise. All we've learned to do is conceal the bones, cover up the blood, and act as though metamorphosis occurs by magic instead of murder. The next time a child says they want to be like Cinderella, keep in mind that they are requesting to dance in blood-stained glass slippers, sign contracts in shifting ink, and swallow their former selves. They are offering their services for the most ancient magic, the metamorphosis that necessitates everything, and the elevation that results from consuming life itself. The really scary part is when we say yes with a smile. We purchase glass slippers and princess outfits for them. We teach kids to envision change. Given that people in our society who refuse to change will always be servants, we train and prepare them for consumption. Those who refuse to eat are eaten. The drums start to fade. The stone circle is deserted. However, the practice persists. In every shopping center, classroom, and social media account where change is marketed as an ideal, we need Cinderella to survive. Cinderella survives. We need the narrative that teaches our kids to sacrifice who they truly are in order to get power. The story that makes consumption acceptable is necessary. Now we're all Cinderella, perpetually changing, devouring, and dying into new identities that bear our memories yet are soulless. Long ago, the fairy tale came to an end. Embedded in every transformation narrative that implies you can become without first ceasing to be. The horror story goes on. peddled as magic and sold as dreams. The girl from prehistory who devoured her mother's heart was truthful. The real monsters are those of us who conceal the same consumption under social media, self-help, and therapy. She was aware of what she had swallowed, at least, asterisk.